In 1973, Chile's democratically elected president, Salvador Allende, was overthrown in a military coup. It led to the torture and death of thousands of people in the name of fighting socialism. Like almost all of South America, Chile was colonized by Spain during the Spanish expansion of the 16th century. Chile then became independent in the early 1800s. After many years of instability, changing governments and political systems, in 1925, Chile settled on a presidential republic under then-President Arturo Alessandri. However, the modern political era in Chile began in the 1930s, when political freedoms were extended and democracy was firmly sustained by the constitution. During that time, the Chilean economy grew, and as the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States began, it also had implications for South America. The events in Cuba of 1953 saw Fidel Castro, which led a socialist revolution, to succeed and challenge the hegemony of the United States in Latin America. Castro gained popularity in South America, which worried the leaders of the US. Because Cuba was ideologically opposed to the United States, the American intelligence agencies were keeping close eye on any potential revolutions happening elsewhere. Also, the Soviet Union was more than keen to expand its influence, and it was looking for potential allies across the Atlantic. So, given this background, we skip to the presidential elections of Chile in 1970. In the early 1970s, Chile held their presidential elections. The race was tight between three primary candidates: Salvador Allende from the Socialist Party, an independent candidate, Jorge Alessandri, and Radomiro Tomic from the Christian Democratic Party. The race was tight, but in the end, Salvador Allende managed to win a narrow plurality in the vote, around 36%, beating Alessandri at 35% and Tomic at 28%. Even though it wasn't the majority of the vote, according to the Chilean constitution at the time, the candidate with the plurality of the votes gets chosen by Congress to become the next president. So in 1970, Salvador Allende, a socialist, was elected as the president of Chile. Given his left-wing ideals and his admirations of Fidel Castro, Allende was put on the regime change list of the United States. However, the propaganda against Allende started even before the elections. The plan of the Americans was to help the opposition candidates with financial and media support during their campaigns. Main point of interest for the Americans were the profitable copper mines in Chile, which were owned by American companies. Allende planned to nationalize the copper sector and use the revenue to help the poor and middle classes. When eventually the ballots were counted and Allende received around 37% of the vote, which was more than any other candidate, the US shifted their attention to pressure the Congress to elect the opposition candidate. The Congress of Chile resisted the pressure from the US and kept the tradition by appointing the candidate with the most votes. So, officially, in 1970, Salvador Allende became the president of Chile and started implementing his socialist ideas. Some of his main reforms included government healthcare, redistribution of farming land, government intervention in the banking sector, and most notably, the nationalization of the copper industry, which was effectively owned and controlled by the US companies. Many people in rural areas welcomed Allende's reforms, which saw improvement in their standards of living. Initially, most of his policies, especially with the nationalization of some sectors, were popular, but by 1972, inflation rates were getting out of control. Major destabilizing factor for the economy came from abroad, as the US clearly stated its intentions to, as they call it, make the economy of Chile scream.
And I indicated that wherever we had a vote, where Chile was involved, that unless there were strong considerations on the other side, that we would vote against them.
So the Nixon administration was using its economic power to destabilize and weaken the Chilean economy. Strikes were organized, accompanied by media propaganda against the president. International loans to Chile were frozen, and so on. all to ruin the popularity of Allende. The tactic was working as inflation levels were rising rapidly in Chile. Shops were empty and workers' strikes paralyzed the country. As the USA clearly made their intentions public how they will use all their economic power to weaken the economy of Chile. As protests were organized against Allende's government and far-right parties were getting more aggressive, in 1973 a fraction of the army attempted an unsuccessful military coup. The army chief at the time, General Carlos Prats and General Augusto Pinochet, did not join the coup plotters and stand firmly on the side of the government. The coup attempt failed and Allende survived, but apparently he did not learn the lesson. After Prats resigned, General Augusto Pinochet was appointed as his successor. The economic turmoil, however, continued in Chile, and in September of that same year, another group of military officers plotted the overthrow of Allende. The newly appointed army chief, General Pinochet, sensed an opportunity to gain all the power, and he joined the conspirators and launched the coup. The presidential palace was quickly surrounded and fierce fighting broke out. In the end, unfortunately, Allende committed suicide and the military junta took over the country. General Augusto Pinochet became the leader and a military dictatorship replaced the once prosperous democracy of Chile. After the military takeover, supporters of Allende were tracked down, arrested, and either imprisoned or killed. Many opposition leaders, left-wing politicians, and sympathizers were tortured by the regime of Pinochet, which made it clear that it would not tolerate any dissent, and so thousands of people lost their lives in the hands of the military junta. The US very quickly recognized the government of Pinochet and provided it with military support. Even though the military dictatorship was committing human rights abuses and torturing dissidents, the US was firmly supporting the regime in their crackdown. It was clear that for democratic America, supporting a military dictator who tortures people is better than supporting a democratically elected but left-wing socialist like Allende. Augusto Pinochet continued to rule the country until 1990, when democracy was brought back to Chile. Chile adopted economic policies of liberalization and privatization. After 1985, Chile's economy outperformed most of the other Latin American economies. The rapid economic growth eventually paved the way for democracy to return to Chile. Opponents of these policies, however, argued that these economic reforms widened the inequality and were aimed at benefiting American corporations at the expense of the Chilean population. Unfortunately, democracy in Chile ended violently with the death of Allende and a military takeover by General Pinochet. The socialist government of Allende attempted to redistribute the wealth of the country to some of its poorest residents. The nationalization plans of major industries like copper did not match well with the capitalists of the United States, which used its economic and intelligence apparatus to undermine Allende's government. It all culminated in the 1973 military coup, in which General Pinochet took power by force and ruled the country violently for nearly 20 years. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure also to subscribe and follow more videos of the Hidden Wars.